You're good to go. All right, here we go. Thank you, Sam.
Is it to me now?
Yep, it's all you.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate all that. And I'm humbled to be here to chat with you this evening. I guess it's a little bit challenging maybe to talk to a group of archaeologists and folks who have so much knowledge and experience. So I'll try not to stray off too much. I'm not an expert in anything. Basically, I'm a lawyer. So and I have a fair amount of nonprofit background. So
If it makes you feel better, Sam, I don't know anything either. I'm just an amateur. I just run the clubs. Everything I know, I've learned from these folks. So,
oh, great. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate it. So I will get my slides keyed up here, and hopefully they are sharing okay.
looks good from here.
So again, as I said, I know that many of you know much more about the subject matter of archaeology than do I, and a lot of this natural history. But this is an incredible story that is fun to tell, and it's a complex story because it really spans a very wide period of time, almost two centuries of American history, and 2 centuries of agricultural industrial development. So you know, it's a fun subject, but it is complex, and we always have a lot of stories to tell at Union Mills. I like to start a presentation like this by asking the audience to imagine if you were out there somewhere in the universe and you were watching all the planets that were out there in the universe, and there was just one little dark spot in the very far corner that had been dark for millions of years, and then for whatever reason, after all these millions of years of being silent, it just lit up with light and with energy emanating from the planet. And you sometimes just have to ask, what was that? There's a scientist and theoretician by the name of Vaclav Smil, and he makes that point, and it just helps when you try to understand the concept of industrialization and technological revolution that we've experienced in the last couple centuries, to kind of start with that sort of framework. I mean, ultimately, as with the story at Union Mills, it comes down to the innovation, and that's a story that we try to tell.
Sam, apologies if you're just about to tell us this, but I have a question in the chat. Someone wants to know where Union Mills is located.
Well, that is a great question. So Union Mills is in Carroll County, and it is on the Route 97, about 17 miles south of Gettysburg. So we're between Westminster and Gettysburg, if that gives you any sense of location.
Thanks.
So, and yeah, I do appreciate that. Feel free to jump in anytime you have a question. So this is a classic view of the Union Mills Homestead, the actual home in which this family lived for so many years. The operation, the business was it was a business enterprise between two brothers who combined their various skills, and it was formed a business. The house itself is where they lived. It started as a 4-room log framed structure and expanded over time into a rambling 23-room structure that it is today. And it's a neat, beautiful old home. It's lovely. It's a very lovely landscape surrounding it, and we have an incredible collection of original family furnishings, which is also kind of neat, very charming. But this beautiful old home kind of belies a much more complex and larger story of this complex story of agricultural industrial development over a period of almost 2 centuries. So here is a view of that early industrial complex looking down from basically as you drive today, as you would drive into the site, first thing you see is the grist mill sitting there. It was again founded as a joint enterprise between these brothers, Andrew and David Shriver Jr., and it was the kind of quintessential union of two mills, a grist mill and a sawmill. But don't let the kind of union or equal status of the name fool you. This really was all about the grist mill. The sawmill was a supporting trade. If you just kind of compare the kind of small little home that they lived in and this very big brick grist mill, it's very obvious that the grist mill was where they made their capital investment and where they made their money. So, what these two brothers founded was in essence an early industrial complex. And their story is one of the, industrial development in an area that we now know as Carroll County. But as suggested by the presentation title, what I like to focus on are the kind of key resources that go into what made that site so successful, the business so successful. And wood was a critical component of the early industries that comprised the Union Mills operation. Certainly there was a grist mill, but there also was a leather tannery and a sawmill. And of course, a variety of other supporting trades, but the sawmill, the grist mill, and the leather tannery gives you the kind of the bark, boards, and barrels. And to appreciate that resource, we really need to kind of go back further in time to pre-Columbian North America. Where this continent was just covered with these massive stands of oak and other, chestnuts, beech, and other trees. And it was just this incredible resource that was here. And when the European settlers got here, they really where you just found this incredible resource, which, we sometimes look at a landscape that is devoid of trees in many respects in large areas, particularly areas that are heavily farmed, and just don't appreciate just how critical, how much woodland there was, and how critical that was to the early phases of the Industrial Revolution. But another important resource, of course, was the rich farmland that was there after the forests were cleared. And in this rich farmland, Maryland farmers did their planting. Very early on, of course, they tried tobacco, and tobacco certainly seemed like it was a pretty good idea, but it and there was tobacco certainly grown in Maryland and certainly farther south in Maryland, but as they realized quickly that wheat was a much better cash crop, and the history of Maryland and certainly the history of Carroll County and Frederick County, what it was called then, and certainly Baltimore, was all about wheat and the flour economy. And it was an incredibly important cash crop, and in many ways, this presentation is about wheat and about the flour that was generated in the mills like Union Mills. This is a kind of a busy slide, but what it shows you is the evolution of the U.S. Wheat industry. And the only thing you really need to know is that the colored states on the eastern seaboard where wheat was growing in the early 19th century, and in fact, by the turn of the 19th century, what was then Frederick County, Maryland, was the breadbasket of the country. And then as time went on over the next century, wheat production moved west for a variety of reasons, beyond the scope of what I can probably talk about tonight, but great, the types of wheat were growing change. There was, of course, migration and clearing and a variety of other things. But I think that by the end of the 19th century, the grain production was centered out into Dakotas. Whereas at the beginning of the century, it was centered in in Frederick County, what was then Frederick County. So that's really a key part of our story. And it's also a key part of Baltimore's story, because that wheat production and the flour that was then milled in mills like Union Mills was worked its way into the port of Baltimore, and it is really what made Baltimore into the mercantile center that it became. It was the first thing, that the first crop, the first in economic boom for Baltimore was wheat flour. So and with that production of flour came the need to transport the flour to Baltimore. And so this incredibly large amounts of flour were needed to get down to the port, and they came through the turnpikes that were rapidly developing. These turnpikes were just great opportunities for not just flour to be sent to Baltimore, but for folks who were migrating westward to go where they were going, to get to places like Pittsburgh and the Ohio River Valley, and for other cash crops and whiskey and things like that to get down to Baltimore. So it really was a period, a booming period for the kind of development of the economic development of the region. So with those roads came heavy turnpike traffic. This Carl Rackamon painting was done for the U.S. government in the 20th century, but it gives you some sense of kind of the booming traffic, both stagecoach traffic and Conestoga wagons that came across turnpikes. And this turnpike is showing the national road, but those turnpikes, including one that came right through Union Mills, were an incredible, again, boom. And kind of like you see when you drive the interstates today, where there are gas stations and hotels that form around the exits. Well, so too on the turnpikes. And so Andrew Shriver, who was operating Union Mills by his brother, had moved on pretty quickly. Andrew Shriver realized, well, I can make some money, not just by having a mill, but I can have a post office, and I can have an inn and tavern. And so this little crossroads community at Union Mills very much prospered and developed. So you see in this image a early 20th century view of Union Mills, which looks a little sleepy, but it does give you a sense of what it might look like in the century before. And that the roads that intersected right there in front of the mill, those roads all came together right at that mill and provided a easy access from the mill down to the port of Baltimore. And yet again, it was a booming operation, and the family did well. They prospered, and over time, 6 generations of this family lived at Union Mills on through the early 1960s. So, again, the core of this operation was the grist mill, and it was a water-powered factory that processed grains and turned them into the flour. And as you can see depicted in this fairly recent photo, there's a big wooden water wheel that, of course, was constructed with the massive stands of oaks that surrounded the area. And the interior of the mill also, was required huge amounts of wood, not just to build it, but also to develop all the machinery that was inside the mill. So grains were ground into flour between stones, and those stones are kind of where the rubber met the road in flour production. And here's a more recent image of our stones at Union Mills showing them in action. The one on the left is being used, the one on the right is actually not being used. It's being dressed. So you see it's flipped over so that the runner stone, the miller could get access to the runner stone to get those the grooves on the stone sharpened for to produce grain, to produce flour. So yeah, I've talked a bit about wood, and I'm going to continue to do that, but I got to give some credit to water because that, all that economic activity needed power. you needed energy to power the work, and water is certainly the sine qua non. You couldn't do this. This operation wouldn't work without that water. It powered every part of the operation, and was used not just extensively in the for the grist mill and sawmill, but also in the tannery. So with that water, then you have this machinery, these massive wooden gears inside the mill at Union Mills. This is the inside of our mill, and this is restoration work that was done in the 1980s by a millwright by the name of Derek Ogden. But you get some sense of the massive amount of and the technological kind of thought that goes into powering this massive operation. The grist mill at Union Mills not just was a big grist mill, but it was in its time a very modern grist mill. It was designed using the concepts, the designs of Oliver Evans, who was a millwright and inventor who designed what was in effect the first fully automated industrial process. And at the heart of the Oliver Evans mill was the powertrain. Essentially, you see that this, these big gears here that transmit power from one part of the mill to the other.
Sam, if I may ask, what's
Yeah.
the scale of this that we're looking at? How big is this piece of machinery here?
Well, I can tell you this. I should have been prepared on some of the dimensions, but the water wheel itself is a 16-foot water wheel. And one of the reasons that's significant is that there are different types of water wheels. There's a water wheel that flows the water from the top, which is an overshot water wheel. There's a water wheel that flows with water hitting it at the bottom, which is an undershot water wheel. And at Union Mills, we have water that the distance between the water that comes off the mill race and the water where it leaves the tail race is 8 feet. So the water hits halfway at the backside of the water wheel. And so that is, again, you guys are, I'm sure there are a lot of folks on this call who are a lot more smart on the physics of all this than I am, but that's, that number, that 8 feet, and then the size of the water wheel determines just how many horsepower you can get off of this operation. And, there is some information we have in some of the early records that reflects that it was a double water wheel. What we're not sure about is whether that's referring to the fact that there was a water wheel for the mill, a grist mill, and a water wheel for a flutter wheel probably for the sawmill, or whether there was actually 2 water wheels for the grist mill. When I say 16 feet, those big gears are probably 8 to 10 feet in diameter. I wish I had those dimensions right in front of me, but I don't.
Thanks.
And this is a kind of a complicated slide. It might be hard to make out, but it basically gives you the idea that in an Oliver Evans mill, it was fully automated. And everything from the time the grains came into the mill to the time the flour left the mill, it need not be touched by human hands. It was the material handling and all the processing that occurred was fully automated. And this was the first fully automated industrial process. Long before we got these. Henry Ford came along with what he did in the 20th century. We had this circa 1790 invention by Oliver Evans, which was just brilliant in its time. And it was, in fact, of all the patents that were ever issued, his concept was patent number 3. Signed by the president at the time, George Washington. So George Washington was so impressed with this idea that he went out and got the idea, bought the rights to it, and built an automated mill at Mount Vernon, which you can visit today. Of course, the one at Mount Vernon is a restoration, is a complete restoration. every stone is a restoration down there, but it's been incredibly well restored. And it is, if you've never been there, it will definitely give you the flavor for an Oliver, fully automated Oliver Evans mill. Of course, it was not just a grist mill, there was also a sawmill. This is a photo I took earlier this year at the Shelburne up in Vermont, but it gives you a sense of, again, the massive amount of wood that goes into each aspect of the operation. This is a kind of a classic up and down saw that was powered with the water, and was a critical part of the operation. And it's interesting, we're doing some work at the house at Union Mills, trying to assess its condition. And it's fascinating to see that the very earliest sections of the house included some log members, not just in the floor joists, but also in some of the framing. And then, as you know, very rapidly after that, most of the wood is sawn. So you can see that they probably did some early construction before they had the sawmill in place. And then once the sawmill was going, then they had sawn wood that they could use for their houses, their barns, their outbuildings. Bottom line to the operation, though, was that the Shriver enterprises were innovative, not just for using the Oliver Evans process, but also because the business form, their businesses were vertically integrated. Just about everything could be done on site that they needed. They had a blacksmith shop where they could, prepare nails and that type of stuff, or any of the metal fasteners they needed to hold all that wood together. And of course, all of the machinery needed to be, you needed to move power, not just through those gears, but then there were off takes that went to the machines, and those were driven by leather belts. So you needed to have a tannery. And so the tannery was an important part of the operation. Now, so the tannery is a hard thing for us to interpret, if for no other reason, because we have a big, beautiful grist mill that you see right as you walk, as you drive into Union Mills. There's this incredible grist mill, and it basically steals the show. The problem with the tannery is that there's very little left of the tannery, and it's a much more difficult thing to interpret. Certainly because we operate at 18th, 19th century facilities, and so there's not much left of the tannery. But it was an incredibly important part of the original operation, and over time, as the flour industry became less of so the flour operation became less of a moneymaker, the tannery grew to be an industrial operation in its own. A key part of what they did in their tanning was they had to get bark. They needed bark that was it was ground up, and it became used, basically turned into a tea with water added to it that could be in which the hides would be processed. They'd get basically an infusion of bark, and the tannic acids would leach out of that bark and then would be infused into the leather, into the animal hides to make leather. We have a wealth of resources at Union Mills. Although we don't have a whole lot of modern facility, we have just an incredible amount of resource, including an incredible amount of papers, just neat stuff, including this. This was from the original patent use agreement paid by Andrew Shriver in 1813, I think it was, to use this very early style bark mill, horse-powered bark mill to grind the grind bark into this powder that was used in the tanning operation. And of course, the byproduct, what came out of the tannery, was leather, which was used for just about everything, not just to power the for belts and so forth in the mill, but also, of course, for harnesses, for saddles, for shoes, belts, just about anything you could imagine. Tanning animal hides is an ancient craft. It's been around for millennia, and in many ways, the tanning of leather really didn't change much from ancient times into, the 18th and 19th century. But one thing, yeah, they certainly were some automations that were brought into the process. But one thing that was near universal was that you had to prepare the hide, and then they had to tan it. This is an image from an engraving from a Popular Science Monthly in 1892 that shows the inside of a beam house. And the beam house was a critical part of a tannery. That's where basically the hides came in and were processed initially, where they were dehaired, and there was an initial soaking process to kind of loosen up the hair and get the hides ready for processing and tanned. This is another neat old image. Again, this is ancient. It's an old German woodcutting that shows an old tannery. And again, a lot of the process that you see in this image are pretty much what was being done at Union Mills in the early days. And you see in the background, again, there was a vat in which hides were processed. Earlier this year, I had a nice little trip with my daughter. We went out to the Bristol tannery, the Ware tannery in Bristol, England. And this is an image from that trip that shows one of the liming vats that were there. And this was the preliminary process to get the hides ready for tanning. And then this image shows you just this incredible room that was chock full of these tanning vats, in which, again, the hides were laid away in these vats. The Ware tannery, they actually have these hides laid away for a year and a day. So it's a very lengthy process to use this old style vegetable-based tanning process to get these hides effectively turned into leather. And then this is a diagram of a tanyard from an 1890 treatise that basically gives you some sense how a tannery in the late 19th century was arrayed with beaming, a section for beaming work, and then a big section in the middle for these layaway vats. I know I've gone into a lot of detail on tanning, but I thought it'd be helpful to have that background, because it kind of goes into understanding what we've done in trying to investigate the tanning operation at Union Mills, to better understand it, and to learn more about what resources we may have on site. And that leads us to this discussion of our kind of ongoing industrial archaeology at Union Mills. This aerial view of the site in circa 1950 or so gives you some sense of all the different structures on the site as you come in off the road. Now, the road's changed a little bit, but it gives you some sense. You come into the site and there are a bunch of structures, and it's a mix of both domestic structures and industrial structures arrayed on the site, with that big grist mill there in the center, and then in the trees behind is the house. But we realized that it was critical that we understand more about kind of this lost industry, the tannery, because there was so little of the tannery remaining. And so we commenced in the last few years an investigation directed to the tannery. This started out with first a historic resources study that we had the Elizabeth Comer's team and at EAC Archaeology, and Rob Weiner and his archaeologists did a phase 1A archaeological assessment, and then a phase 1 archaeological investigation. This 1877 image of the Shriver tannery from basically the parking lot, if you were to come to Union Mills today, gives you some sense of how much the operation had grown from its sort of early days as being a supporting trade at Union Mills to by 1877 being a major industrial operation in its own right. And they had even moved to steam power. And so you see that big smokestack there burning away. And of course, they had a ready source of fuel using spent tan bark from the tanning operation. So the operation had grown and was pretty productive. In 1877, the family actually went to the Centennial exhibition in Philadelphia and showed their wares. And so I guess you might call that the heyday of the operation. They were very proud of the quality of their leather and were very proud of how far they had come. They were actually receiving hides from Texas, tanning them at Union Mills, and then selling them, through merchants in Philadelphia and Baltimore. Selling the leather through merchants in Philadelphia and Baltimore. Unfortunately, by the last decade of the 19th century, the operation really couldn't compete. There was just such a rapid amount of industrialization and centralization with big industrial concerns that had bought up a lot of the tanning operations. There was no rail in Union Mills, so transportation was an issue. And so the tanning operation at Union Mills wound down, and by 1900, it was gone. And these old buildings that were tanning structures became used for either garages or barns, or were taken down. So by the time we get to modern time, we have this view of what remains of that was the drying shed at Union Mills. You see back there in the background, that's actually a restoration structure because we had a fire, destroyed our drying barn in 1990. But you see that red kind of section cordoned off there on the slide. And that's the area that we had identified as being the most likely to be productive for investigation. And again, with loss of these structures and this big open space, you kind of ask yourself, well, what could possibly be there? So that was the source of our, I guess, interest in the tannery and in the potential further investigation. So when Liz Comer and her team came out, they started working the project up, did a lot of investigation and background reading, and kind of pieced together what the operation looked like. And so here you see this slide with showing how the remaining tannery structures look, with this diagram showing what structures used to be there. And that investigation was very helpful in kind of directing the next steps in the investigation. Next thing we did was a ground penetrating, if I can pronounce it right, ground penetrating radar investigation. And so we had this wonderful team come out to do GPR work. And I'm no expert on the complexity of this. When I saw the results, it looked like Greek to me. I really was almost devastated by the idea that there was just all this complex stuff that meant nothing, but they were excited by what they saw. And in fact, after the processing of the data, they learned all kinds of information. In fact, they got extensive information about the tanning complex, and basically discovered that there was I guess what you call a labyrinth of tannery structures remaining in the ground in that area where the ground penetrating radar was done. So in early 2021, we started, early 21, I guess, was when we did the GPR. And then later that year, EACA followed up with an excavation of a 1 by 1 meter test unit, with the idea that they wanted to verify the location of any subsurface structures that might be there. They wanted to better understand the composition of the soils and what was in the pit, and to assess materials that were used in that construction if they found anything. That work went over 2 days, and again, it just provided us with a wealth of information. And I mean, I guess the biggest thing that comes to mind is, which I guess is the most obvious, is that if you have a hole and you want to get rid of it, the easiest thing to do is to fill it with stuff. So that's what they did, certainly. And there was a lot of fill in these, what used to be these tanning vats, but they certainly didn't remove any structures that were there. That was what we kind of figured that humans being, as always try to be as efficient as possible. The idea of removing these structures didn't make sense to us, and it certainly didn't make sense to the Shrivers back when they shut down the tanning operation, as we found. So the excavation revealed that there were vats still in the ground, constructed with wooden walls and with a clay exterior that we used to, I guess, waterproof them. And then, of course, when the tanning operation came to the close, they were filled with fill and other junk that they had. And that's what we found in this vat. So not only did we have a 1 by 1 meter test unit, but it turns out we basically hit the interior of one of the vats. And it was a pretty cool set of findings that promise, there shows that there's quite a bit of promise still in the ground of further information about this tannery that evolved from a cottage industry into a large and successful tanning operation. It was really rewarding for us to get this view of the wall of what used to be one of the tanning vats, hidden down at the bottom of this test unit. And then, we were able to get some samples of the wood planking and submit it to again, I'm no expert on how to pronounce this stuff, an archaeobotanical, maybe, consultant. Anyway, they who assessed the wood and told us that those fragments that were examined were of beech wood, likely chestnut, which makes sense in terms of the stands of trees that would have been in the area. We get this incredible view of this vat that was in the ground. And then the next thing that was perhaps even more exciting was that they then used a probe to probe down into the what would be the exterior wall of the vat, and pulled up a plug of material. And what they found was a wealth of organic material, including a bunch of animal hairs that was at the bottom of the plug, which to their thinking was the bottom of one of the wooden pipes that was used to connect the tanning vats. So I guess, one more little bit of background that would be helpful. And I enjoyed using this slide in several presentations I've done, but it's from some of the old tanning journals, and you can see the stuff that you would buy if you were going to build a tannery. So you buy these. By the late 19th century, you didn't have to do this yourself. You could actually buy it and have it shipped to you. It was essentially like a casket, a wooden box that could be sunken down into the ground. And then you could buy these pipes, these wooden pipes that were used to connect the tanning vats. I think, and I apologize for not having this at my tip of my tongue, I think we had 20 some vats. We've actually found a document that showed us by 1827 the exact number of vats at Union Mills, and I should have verified that number. I think it was like 20 some odd. And I'm going to say 27, but I'm afraid that might not be the right number. But bottom line, there were a bunch of vats, and one of the things tanners would do is they would connect the vats with this piping so that they could adjust the percentage of the solution, the tanning solution. You would start with a milder solution, and they would get over time. You would move either move the hides or move the fluids such that they would get increasingly more concentrated in terms of the tannic acids and all the solids. And the idea was to basically infuse as much of this tannic acid into the leather as possible. And that is what determines the highest quality leathers. So anyway, that's what they found at the bottom of this vat. They believe that they, on the outside of the vat, they believe they pierced what remained of one of these wooden pipes, and the ground penetrating radar certainly suggested that was just this massive array of piping and vats that are all still in the ground there, where the tannery used to be. So again, that's just an incredible story of kind of taking this early use of wood in ag industry, and being able to not just think it through logically, but then to find it in the ground to verify the concept, the theory that we had. So I would be remiss if I didn't address a couple other industries, supporting trades and industries. Of course, one of the supporting trades in the early days was a wheelwright, because you needed to transport all this stuff. So there was a wheelwright on site that you take the wood and you fashion it into the wheels and into the machinery, of course, that you needed for wagons. And of course, probably adjacent to that was the cooper shop, where barrels were made. And there was a cooper shop through the 19th century at Union Mills. And one of the stories of the cooper shop that's interesting is that in 1869, B.F. Shriver, who was the son of second generation William Shriver, so B.F. Shriver is one of the third generation of the family at the site. And he came up with this idea that, we're doing all this farming and we got all these fruits and we got all this stuff. Why don't I start canning it and selling it? So he launched the B.F. Shriver Canning Company started in the cooper shop there at the mill at Union Mills. And of course, this operation was successful. And as all the other industries sort of faded away, the B.F. Shriver Company expanded in operation. And by the early 1900s, there were 6 canneries in the operation that the family had, including a pretty wide geographic range. They had a canning operation, not just at Union Mills and at Westminster, but also up in Littlestown, Pennsylvania, and as far west as Williamsport for a period of time. So, and of course, in Sykesville and New Windsor. So it was a very big operation and continued in business until the 1960s. So you have this operation that started with wood and water and transformed over time into, not just the first phases, the second of the Industrial Revolution, but also the second phases, where these operations were powered with steam power and then later electricity. And so we kind of have all phases of the Industrial Revolution covered here at Union Mills. Today, the site is a very tranquil and quiet site. It's hard to sometimes impress upon our guests that the level of activity with the industrial operations, the Stagecoach Tavern, the mail, the post office. There was so much activity on the site, almost like going to the mall today. And yet you have this beautiful site today that's used not just for our museum, but also for events like weddings and other community events. And we're blessed that there's so much remaining. There's just an incredible degree of authenticity of the landscape and the structures, and even the preserved archaeological remains of these industrial operations. So that's what we do, is we operate the Union Mills Homestead and Grist Mill. There's our website. And I think that pretty much is what I want to say. And I'm guessing somebody has a question. So I'm going to stop my sharing and let folks ask questions they may have.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. I'm attempting to formulate a question. There were a lot of people who had an interest in acquiring lumber at that time, right? Everybody wanted the oak trees. So what was the process like for claiming ownership of the oak, and how did they get it before, like, like the King of England got it and things like that?
So, the part of it was a question of, real estate. And, Union Mills, the operation in 1797 was 104 acres. It grew to be several hundred acres on top of that. But so most families would have, of course, it was very rural. You would have a wood lot, and the wood lots would be used for not just firewood, but also for lumber. One of the challenges, and again, I took a lot of slides out because there was just so much to talk about. But one of the things I like to say is that, so by the basically the Civil War era, much of the landscape was barren of trees. That was one of the challenges, was that we basically cleared out so many trees that lumber became a challenge, and bark became a challenge. They went increasingly had to go farther and farther to get bark to operate the tannery. And of course, by the end of the 19th century, then we had the next problem, which was blight. Chestnut blight started just around the turn of the 20th century. And of course, by the 1950s, the American chestnut was gone. So, and of course, now we have other, Dutch elm disease and all these other blights and diseases that are taking out so many of our old hardwoods. So that is one of the lumber was a challenge, as was the bark, and getting it was a challenge. And that was, and one of the reasons that the operation really wasn't that efficient by the time it failed.
That makes sense. I'm guessing then that the process of removing bark didn't actually kill the trees, because that would have seemed.
Well, no, what would happen is you'd clear the trees, they would come in, you'd bark them, and they'd go to lumber. So yeah, they didn't take a little bit of bark and leave a
Well,
tree
there was the
standing.
one advertisement that you shared where they were essentially calling on people to peel bark from their own trees and send it in, and I feel like that I'm not sure that would work out so well.
Well, so the idea is, if you had a lumber at a sawmill, and of course
Oh, I gotcha. Okay.
you look at old maps in Carroll
Yeah,
County,
yeah.
and there were um, we have a map in our mill that's kind of cool, but just on our side of um, the watershed. So Carroll County is divided by Pars Ridge. One side, the water goes to Patapsco, and our side, it goes down to Monocacy. Just on our side of that, the watershed, the Double Pipe Creek watershed, there were like 55 grist mills, another 50 some on the other side. So there were a lot of grist mills, and almost every grist mill had a sawmill, or there was a sawmill nearby. So, folks back then, were pretty savvy. I always tell folks that the distance you would drive to go get a loaf of bread today is about the same distance they would go take a horse to get flour. And there were sawmills just about everywhere. So where there was a sawmill, the bark was a byproduct, and that would go into these tanning operations.
Understood. Here's a question in the chat. On that town map, where is the water source for the mill?
So I skipped that slide also in the interest of brevity, but there is and I might be able to share that. I don't know if that's my next one or not. So here's a slide that gives you a sense of what was, the town of Union Mills was then called Myersville. And you see all these roads coming together here at Union Mills, but right through the middle of the valley is Big Pipe Creek. And when you come into Union Mills, a lot of folks don't see that initially. They just see a big line of trees, but that big line of trees in the center of the valley is surrounding Big Pipe Creek, and that is the source of water that powered the operation. Union Mills is settled in a big wide valley. They basically located that mill as close as they could be to the water, while being far enough away to have enough head, I guess what they call the distance between the water where it comes off the creek at the top of the head race and where it goes down at the bottom. So they needed to get just far enough away to power the mill, but to also be close enough to make use of the water. So it was strategic to be located very close to Pipe Creek.
Awesome. Are there other questions for Sam Riley of the Union Mills Homestead? Thank you, Sam. That was super interesting and super informative, and just a window into the history of this region. I'm not originally from Baltimore. I've been here for about 15 years now, and I'm always finding new aspects of this area that they have such a rich history here that it's really neat to learn about it. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. And hopefully, someone has a question.
Oh yes, go ahead, Jackie. No,
No,
just
she's just saying
I'm
good.
just saying thank you. That was really wonderful. I've had my camera and my mic off, but I've been listening intently. That was very, very good presentation.
Well,
I
thank you
second
very
that.
much.
Here's one in the chat, actually, real quick. Do you know the processes that determined if the leather was soft shoe leather or heavy straps for belting?
So again, my understanding is that the best thickest part of it, and I had a couple slides on the tanning process I took out, but the thickest part of the cowhide was sole leather. And that sole leather was the best and most durable part of the hide. Could also be used for harness leather. So harness leather and sole leather, I think, is what they use for the bottom of your shoes, and for harnesses. The stuff that was thinner could be used for the tops and for other kind of things that didn't need to be quite as sturdy. But it was based on the thickness and the location on the animal hide.
So it's not the process, it's the location on the animal. That's interesting.
Well, again, I should say this. Part of it was process also, because they did have machines, splitters and so forth, where they could basically get them all to a uniform thickness. So there was a process involved. But yeah, the most important consideration for sole leather and for anything that was really needed to be sturdy was the location on the animal hide.
Mm-hmm. And the person also wants to know, did this tannery do any hair on leather?
Hair what?
Hair on leather. I'm imagining like some sort of they leave the hair attached.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We have a in our collection, we actually have a hide, what looks to be a Texas hide that was with hair on. That is a decorative piece. And the problem with some of our collection, it's been there forever, and it was there in the family's collection. Whether the provenance actually takes it back to our tannery or not, I don't know, but I suspect that they did. And part of the reason is, if you look at tanning operations, they didn't just do animal hides or cow hides. They did a lot of stuff. I mean, there was a wide variety of animals that went through that the skins were tanned. And so you got to figure that some of that was for decorative purposes.
Yeah, makes sense. And finally, do you have plans for a permanently excavated vat as a display item?
Somebody's getting me in trouble.
Sorry.
Me.
Spill the tea.
Let me see if I can show you one other slide then. If I can remember which direction it is. I have a slide that, and I might not be able to find it, but it basically shows what our plans are for the future. And we do have the need for, first, what we're doing now is a lot of research. I mean, we have an incredible wealth of documentary records that are almost mind-blowing in terms of how much it is. A lot of this is down at the Maryland Historical Society now. A lot of it's still at Union Mills, but there's just so much information that we need to understand more about everything. There's a digitization project that's an offshoot of that goes into getting the stuff accessible to a wider audience. And then the third part of that is that we do have some site master planning that is kind of in its early stages. Because yes, there are opportunities for better interpretation. We don't have any modern facilities whatsoever. We operate the site out of 18th and 19th century structures. So yeah, so would it be nice to have some sort of better tannery operation interpretation, including some exposed tanning vats? Absolutely. But a lot of work needs to be done before we get to that.
I'm getting the feeling that some folks want to come visit now because I'm being asked, can we have the address again, please?
Yeah. So the easiest thing to do is to share with you our website, unionmills.org. Everything's right there, unionmills.org. The address is 3311 Littlestown Pike, Westminster, Maryland. And we are open weekends through the end of October this year. We have just expanded our weekend hours into October. The only date we're not open for tours is on the 28th of September, which for a weekend date, because we have a big festival that day. The Maryland Microbrewery Festival. Feel free to come out. And
there's like dozens of festivals on that day. I think we should just like make a day of it and go to all of the festivals, and we'll try to get to
it. But yeah, if somebody has, again, I know you have a very sophisticated audience. If anybody has ideas about the future interpretation or how to kind of go about the planning that needs to be done, feel free to let us know. We're always looking for community input and anything that can better help us better interpret the site and to steward these incredible resources is always appreciated.
I appreciate that, Sam. Hopefully we'll hear from you again, and maybe this, as we talked about before the meeting started, be the start of a long-term kind of partnership in some way, because this is super interesting. I'm really engaged right now. I can tell that our members are as well. So thank you very much. Once again, Sam Riley from Union Mills Homestead. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back here the third Wednesday of next month with another speaker and another topic, and I hope to see some of you then. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.